Hello and welcome to Black Cats Chat, the international fans podcast for Sunderland AFC. My name is Lee Thirkell. I'm from the Bilbao Black Cats, and this is our second podcast of the day. Earlier on, we did a review show of the Norwich match with Robin Bond from the Czech Republic bench, and today we've got an extra special guest. We've got Sunderland's number one historian, the official historian for the club. It's Rob Mason. Rob, good evening. How are you?
Yeah, good evening to you and to everybody taking the trouble to listen from wherever in the world they're based.
Everywhere, mate. Everywhere. We Sunderland take over everywhere we go. You know that. Well, Rob. I mean, listen. We had that chant many years ago in the '90s. Remember, it was like, "Who needs Cantona?" when we got Dickie Ord. So I
Yeah,
always say, "Who needs Encyclopedia?" when we got Rob Mason.
yeah, yeah.
Because,
Uh,
uh,
don't don't believe all you hear. People always say Rob knows everything about Sunderland. That's not true. Nobody knows everything about Sunderland. Why would you possibly be that encyclopedic? But I do like to think that if I don't know, I can find out pretty quickly, partly because I've got such a good network of real expert friends, all of whom have got their own specialisms. Just to give one example, I frequently get asked questions about kits. Now, I honestly could not care less about the kit as long as it's got red and white stripes on it. And as long as it's got red and white stripes on the back, not a blooming great big hole so you can see the number, because I never know who's got any number anyway. I'm really not bothered. But a lot of people are very fascinated by kits. I get a lot of questions about kits. And so I've got a real expert friend, in this case, a lad called Andrew Smithson, who I co-authored a book called Kit Cats with 4 or 5 years ago, looking at the history of Sunderland kits. So if I get any questions on kits, Andrew's my go-to man. Likewise, get any questions on penalties, which has been something of a subject lately, given our poor penalty record. I've got a friend called Barry Jackson, who's the penalty expert. He did the penalty section in a book I did called The Absolute Record, which I co-authored with Barry and another good friend of mine, Mike Gibson, who's based in Rotterdam, incidentally, seeing as we're talking about international fans. So I've got lots of people who've got their own specialisms. So if I don't know myself, or if I do know, but I just want to check, I know the right people to check who've got really expert knowledge in very specific niche fields of Sunderland Football Club.
yep. And one of those books that I've got, Rob, is this one right here. It's a big in mind.
Yeah.
It's the absolute record. I think it was like from 2 years ago that I bought it.
Yeah.
Listen, worth every single penny, and every Sunderland fan that is out there, you must have this on your bookshelf.
Can I say
Also,
something about that book? It's the only book I'm really going to talk about, unless you ask me about a specific one.
right,
That one was a huge, absolutely monstrous job to do. And I just mentioned I worked with Barry and Mike on Absolute Record, the first volume, which was basically all the games and all the Anaraki stuff. And to be honest, Mike and Barry, who've both got very busy full-time jobs, said when I was going to do volume one, said, Rob, we can't take it on. And I really wanted to do it. So I did it myself. I must admit, I got a lot of help, particularly from Mike, who's brilliant, not least at sourcing rare photographs, very rare photographs. But that was a huge, huge, huge book. A lot of people didn't buy it because they said, oh, I've got all the lads. Well, all the lads came out about 23 years ago. And there's been nearly about 350 players since then. Plus, a lot of the people who were in All the Lads, and All the Lads is a great book. I'm not knocking it. I helped the two guys who wrote that. It's a great book, but obviously we've learned a lot more even about the players who were in All the Lads than we knew when All the Lads came out. However, this is the advert, and I'm sorry if you paid 30 quid for that book, because it was 30 quid, but we've got about 500 left. And if you go onto not sure quite sure what the website is, but the publishers are called Toucan. If you Google Toucan, Twocan, and then Sunderland, the Absolute Record, it should come up. And the publisher's selling them now for a tenner.
oh
So
wow,
that's an absolute bargain. And I did do a little supplement for the players that we signed in the year after that book came out. So the book comes with that supplement, or should do if the publisher does his job properly. So Google Toucan, the Absolute Record Sunderland, and that's a 30 quid book. It's a couple of years old, and because we just basically want them out of the warehouse, We tried to sell the remaining ones for a tenner. There you go, advert over. I'm not doing any more advertising.
Well,
Yeah.
listen, Rob, a tenner or 30 quid, it is worth every single penny, mate.
Thank
And
you.
I have to admit, like when I took it back home from Manchester Airport to Santander, the
Yeah.
woman at the Ryanair check-in counter was a bit baffled that I was holding it in my hand because it wouldn't fit in my backpack, and I was too tight to pay for the 60 quid extra charge for the. So, listen, I read that in the line and I read it on the plane, and it was absolutely fantastic. But
It does weigh a ton. It's worth picking up as opposed to paying for the postage. It does weigh a ton. Yeah.
it does weigh a ton, yeah. Anyway, Rob, so I don't know if you were at the ground last night with Frankie and Danny covering the
Was
match
indeed.
against Norwich.
Yes.
Yeah, what do you think of it? Just before we touch on the international fans thing.
The Norwich game, obviously, it wasn't a great game to watch. It's quite a scrappy game. Not much fluency, not much cohesion in a lot of the play. Thought we improved after the subs came on. But look, I'm very old-fashioned, and I have this ongoing debate with Danny Collins, who I have to say is an absolutely outstanding guy, and in my opinion, an outstanding, very knowledgeable pundit. Danny's always a bit more positive than me in what he wants out of an away game. I always say, look, unless it's the last game of the season and you need to win it to stay up or go up, give me a 0-0 draw away from home every time. I'll bite your hand off. Obviously, I'd like to win. Obviously, I'd like to play well. But when you get off the bus, you've gone to an away game. The last thing you want to be doing, if you were some of those people who trekked all the way down to Carrow Road last night, the last thing you want to be doing is getting back on the bus for a long journey home late at night, having just seen us get beat. You won't care less if you've seen a great game, we've lost 4-3. You don't want to see us get beat. You want to see us win. But if you get back on the bus for a long journey home after an away game, at least come back with a point you start with. And that's what we did last night. So not a great performance. We obviously know we don't need the results at the moment. Regardless of last night's result, making it playoffs mathematically certain. It was certain in every form other than mathematically until last night. And the real stuff starts when we hit the playoffs that we're now assured of being in. So I was happy enough with the result. Always delighted with a clean sheet, and that's 3 clean sheets in a row, of course. For a goalkeeper who'd been getting a bit of stick, well, it can't be that bad if you kept 3 clean sheets in a row. Though I have to say the 2 central defenders, I think, have been outstanding in the last couple of away games, really outstanding. And so more than happy. I would love to win. I'd love to play well, but when we go to Bristol City in the next away game, if you say it's going to be an equally uneventful, scrappy game and we take a 0-0, well, I'll sign up for that now, thank you. And if we play Bristol City in the playoffs, which is entirely possible, and we go to Ashton Gate and come back with another 0-0, show me the form, I'll sign it now.
Yep. So I don't want to put you on the spot then, Rob, but are we going up or not?
Don't know.
Are you going to sit on the fence?
No, well, yes, I am in a way, but I mean, people ask me this all the time. You know, what do I think? People ask me every Saturday if they don't know me, what's the score going to be? What's your prediction of the match? And I always say, look, my only prediction of the match is it will kick off on time unless we're playing Coventry, in which case they'll kick off when it suits them. I don't know what's going to happen. If I knew what was going to happen, it wouldn't be worth going, would you? No. I mean, I know what I want to happen. I want us to play well and win.
Yeah.
But if I was able to predict football matches, you would now be speaking to me while I was in the Bahamas because I'd have won the pools years ago. I don't even try to predict results. Mind you, I generally find that while I've got no idea which Sunderland are going to turn up before the kickoff, 5 to 10 minutes into the game, I've usually got a pretty good idea of how things are going to turn out. Not always, of course. Games can ebb and flow. But you can see 5-10 minutes into the game whether, we're really at it today, we're playing well, the radars are working, or whether the passing is not working. So my only prediction is that we'll kick off on time.
That's a good answer to me. We touched on the Norwich game there, and there were some international fans over because it is International Fans Day this weekend, Rob. Mm-hmm. There was the Bulgarian lads, 2 of the Bulgarians. I don't know if you've met Radoslav. He was over.
Yes, I've met the Bulgarian lads on more than one occasion. Great supporters, really passionate, really enthusiastic. And I know from my experience of meeting international fans from around the world, that's pretty much what you would expect from international fans from anywhere. And indeed, fans, whether they're from Bulgaria or whether they're from, Siem Harbour.
Yeah. Yeah. And we also had Martin Bates as well. I think you know Martin as well. And one
Yeah,
of the podcast guests here, Craig, he lives in Sollentuna, just out Stockholm. He flew over yesterday as well to watch the match. So it's
yeah.
nice to see it, and hopefully we'll have a good turnout on Saturday for that. But anyway, listen, Rob. So um, we're going to start in chronological order of like international theme of this podcast and Sunderland's history with international and European football,
Mhm,
worldwide football. So the red and white influence. All right. Now, there's been a lot of debate between Athletic Club Bilbao, Sparta Rotterdam, Seville.
mhm,
The Sparta Rotterdam seems to be confirmed on their website as being true that they did adopt red and white because of Sunderland. Can you
mhm.
shed any light on that?
Not really, not on Sparta Rotterdam. I know the story. I know what's on their, what's on their website, and so I don't dispute it. It's not something I've ever personally looked into a lot. I've looked more into the Spanish side.
Hmm.
And I know you guys in Bilbao are earlier on I talked about having experts in particular fields like Andrew with his kits or Barry with his penalties or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, if anybody ever came to me now and talked to me about the Bilbao thing, I think, aha, I know just the people. Because, because you lads have done a phenomenal amount of research. I remember putting you in touch with my good friend Keith Gregson,
Yep.
who is the wonderful, lively character that is Keith. You rarely have a conversation without Keith without him bursting into song, but he's like a dog with a bone when you ask him to find something out. Keith is the official historian at Ashbrook Cricket and Rugby Club, and a really great guy. And I know with Keith's help, you've done a lot of work in detail looking to get to the bottom of the Bilbao thing. Now, you could find articles that I wrote 25, 30 years ago where I was blithely stating, yeah, the Sunderland Bilbao connections. And then the more I started to look into that, before I was aware of you guys in Bilbao, a few years ago when I started to look into that and verify it, the harder I looked, the thinner the evidence got.
Hmm.
And as things stand, I have got a very open mind on our links with Bilbao. I keep hoping that one day I'm going to put my computer on and I'm going to have an email from you with some of the research you've done saying, we found this is the Holy Grail, this is some real hard and fast evidence. I'm a bit more confident about the Seville,
Hmm.
with the shipbuilders, McCall and Pollock, who worked up in Southwick,
Yep.
who were Sunderland supporters but not connected with Sunderland Football Club other than being supporters, who went to Seville and played an influential role in the early days of Seville when it was um, a cycling club as much as a football club. I did some work a few years ago now. You'd have to Google when it was Seville's centenary, but whenever it was their centenary, um, I did quite a bit of work with historians from Seville. Did a bit, ended up on their club website, a little film I think that ended up on their club website. I don't know if it's still there. Looking at the connections between Sunderland and Seville. I didn't know this when I went to see Sunderland play at Seville,
Hmm.
which was around about 2003-ish, I think, 2002, 2003, around about then,
Hmm.
when we played a pre-season friendly there. Um, I wasn't aware of that at that time. It was maybe 10 years later that I became aware of the Sunderland Seville links. My only real memory of Sunderland playing at Seville is that they were determined to kick Kevin Phillips off the park within the first 10 minutes, even though it was a friendly. And I learned a bit more about Spanish football than I previously knew. And then on the same tour, we played a team called Algeciras.
Yes, I remember that.
Um, you could sit at the stands at Algeciras and see Gibraltar in the background.
That's right.
Um, And I remember Reedy had disappeared off. He wasn't at the match. Reedy had gone to scout a player. And so Inchy, Adrian Heath, was in charge. I remember turning up on the team bus as we arrived at Algeciras. And Cookie, God love him, Cookie the kit man, said, "Oh, bugger." He says, "Do they play in red and white?" Because he could see the red and white sort of seats and that. And he was thinking, "Oh, blooming heck, have we got the away kit on the..." Anyway, fortunately, we did have the away kit. And then it got very tasty for a friendly. Really too tasty. And so Inchy subbed Kevin Kyle before Kyler got sent off. But then we had two other players, George McCartney, and I'm forgetting who else sent off because it ended up in a big punch up. It was hellish.
I can
You know,
imagine.
I think
That's
that was
it.
the same tour. I think that was the same tour as Seville.
Yes, it was. It was the same too. Yeah. Hey, Reedy wasn't scouting Tyson Nunez, was he, at that moment?
Yeah. um, I think Inchy would have been with him if he'd been scouting Tyson Nunez at a particular time. Milton Nunez. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah. Anyway, we've got the links with like Rotterdam and Bilbao, and And one thing I know is that after our article got published in the Matchday program last year, Rob, in the International Fans Day program, Bob Murray actually reached out to us by email, and he said that one of his biggest regrets was not arranging a friendly with
Yeah,
Bilbao because of
yeah,
the connections,
yeah,
and he said that he actually got invited to go to Bilbao.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Bob talked about that off and on over the years. I mean, obviously I know Bob very well. We share a couple of things, Bob. We share the same initials, Robert Murray and Robert Mason. We share the fact we both got involved in the club in 1986. Sadly, we don't share the same bank balance. But I get on very well with Bob, always have done. And yeah, he's talked to me over the years about the fact he really wanted to have a friendly. The reason it didn't happen, though, because sometimes they did try to make it happen.
yeah,
And the reason it didn't happen is the clubs could never agree on a date because you'll know better than me when the Spanish season starts.
yeah,
But
later, yeah,
in terms of the logistics of setting up a friendly that was useful to both teams from a footballing point of view, Sunderland and Bilbao would always be at different stages of their preparation, looking towards their first league game. And I remember, you might remember a director called Jim Slater,
hmm
who was there, who Bob appointed, and Jim was very keen to have a friendly with Bilbao for all kinds of commercial reasons, because of the links that we thought, I think, were there between the clubs. Thought he could make a lot out of that. So Jim was dead keen to have a friendly with Bilbao, but just could never be fixed up because of logistics. Who knows? One day it will be.
yep,
But there's lots of people want a friendly with Sunderland. I was out recently, very kindly, at the day of the Hull game. It was my highlight of the day because obviously the Hull game was our one home defeat in the league this season. And that night I went out for a bite to eat after the game with the lads from the German branch of the Supporters Association.
yes,
And, they were very keen that Sunderland would have a friendly with Essen, obviously our twin town, as it were. And clearly, as people will probably know, Essen play at a far different level of football to Sunderland. So there's not a lot in it from a footballing point of view. But you would think from Sunderland's point of view, but you would think from the relative council's point of view on both sides of, the council here in Sunderland and also in Germany with Essen, you would think that would be something they might want to help make happen at some point in the future, and who knows, it might.
yeah, no, that'd be nice. And actually, Ian from the German Black Cats, who actually said, yeah, ask Rob Mason that because I'll be able to get the bus to the ground in Essen. So.
Yeah. So, yes, I do know Ian. Very good lad, very passionate supporter. However, Ian should know I don't have that much influence in fixing up the fixtures.
Yet.
If we had the last few seasons, pre-season friendlies might have been in Southwest Scotland against Stranraer.
All right. So we'll move on then. So in the early 1930s, Sunderland became a bit of a popular figure to go and play some friendlies abroad.
Yeah.
Specifically in Spain in 1934, we played 3 matches against the Spanish national team. 13th of May was a 3-3 draw in Bilbao at San Mamés, which was 2 goals for Jimmy Connor and I can't remember who the other one was. Harry Shaw, yeah. And then we had a game in Madrid in the Chamartín Stadium, 2-2, 2 days later. And then we had the 20th of May in Valencia, Mestalla. We won 3-1. So what can you tell us about those games?
Well, that was the 3-1 win. That was the same scorers as in the Bilbao game. 2 from Jimmy Connor, the left winger, and a penalty from Harry Shaw. Obviously, you talk about the teams of the 30s. The people, the players that people of our generation tend to have heard of, unless they know all of them, tend to be Rach Carter, Bobby Gurney, Johnny Mapson. They're the 3 that they tend to know. Some people listening to this will remember the old Sunderland supporter Billy Simmons, who for many, many years ran the transport on the Sunderland, for the Sunderland Supporters Association, transport of away games, and brought out a really thorough history book in 1986 on Sunderland. And Billy was a really, really good friend of mine. I mean, he was quite an old fellow when I was first going to away games, and I was just a young lad. But I learned a lot off Billy. And Billy always used to say to me that Jimmy Connor was his favourite player from the 30s. And he would wax lyrical about how good Jimmy Connor was. I never interviewed Jimmy Connor. I interviewed a couple of players from the 30s team, but not Jimmy. But I did once go to visit his son, Jill Connor, who lived in a house that backed onto the old Charlie Hurley Centre at the old training ground. and talk to him about his dad and his dad's career, and look through some sort of family photographs and scrapbooks and all that sort of stuff. So if I've got to sort of say a little bit about Jimmy Connor, because he's a name that a lot of people might not really know too much about, but was a big hero. Didn't play in the cup final team because he broke his leg by then, but a big player through the 30s, and a big player in the 36 championship team, and obviously in those games in Spain. Now, when you talk about those games in Spain in 34, where are we now? 2025. So in 4 or 5 years' time, the world's media will be going mental as they tell us it's the centenary of the World Cup. The first World Cup having been in Uruguay in 1930. Mm-hmm. The first World Cup in Europe was taking place in 1934 in Italy. And Sunderland's games in Spain against the Spanish 11s were Spain's warm-up games for the 34 World Cup. Now, in the 34 World Cup, Spain went on to beat Brazil, and they held the hosts, Italy, in the quarterfinal before losing a replay 1-0. That was the only game, the draw between Spain and Italy, that was the only game that Italy did not win, as they went on to be the first European winners of the World Cup in Europe. Now, in the 3 games that Sunderland played against Spain, as you say, we won 1 and drew 2. And yet that team that we played, because almost all of them went on to the World Cup, there was only a couple of players, 2 or 3 players who played against Sunderland who didn't end up in the World Cup squad and playing the World Cup. They were then good enough to beat Brazil and good enough to hold the hosts and the team who won the World Cup, but they couldn't beat Sunderland. And they did. And Sunderland did that without their best player, because Rach Carter wasn't playing. Rach Carter was away on international duty playing for England.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So Sunderland get it rammed down their throats a lot that we haven't had any real European football, not since we won the FA Cup and we played those games in 73, 74 season, but the games were all in 73. Mm-hmm. Against Vasas Budapest and Sporting Lisbon. I saw the home games in that European Cup Winners' Cup campaign. But if there had been European football in the 1930s, club football, as people listen to this probably mainly know, that didn't start till after the war. Mm-hmm. And even then, the English authorities were not keen for the English teams to start taking part. But Sunderland was such a great side in the 30s, and in 34, in these games against Spain, they haven't reached their peak. But if there had been European football in the 30s, say if European football had got going on the back of the World Cup getting going in 1930, there's no question that Sunderland would have been very likely to have been likely to win European trophies in the 1930s. And then you talked about their 34, as you will know, Lee, in 35, Sunderland went back to Spain.
Yep.
We took on a Catalonia 11 in Barcelona and won 7-1. Bobby Gurney getting a hat-trick. And then we took on a Madrid 11 in Madrid, and Patsy Gallagher scored both goals as we won 2-1. Mm-hmm. So, our early experiences going to Spain clearly were big moments. They were prestige friendlies. It was great for the players to go and experience a different style of football, but they certainly came out on top against, top class players. As I say, players who went on to do very, very well in the World Cup just a week or 2 after playing those 3 games against Sunderland in 1934.
Yeah, no, and one of those players was Zamora, the goalkeeper, mm-hmm. and that's, I don't know if you know Spanish football, but Zamora is like basically the prize given to the goalkeeper with the most clean sheets at the end of the season. So he was playing that game. So then, did any other teams get invited to play friendlies against countries, or was it just Sunderland?
Oh, I've got no idea. Ask me about Sunderland. I've got no idea. I've got a bit of an idea, but I'd have to look up, whether Stoke City or Sheffield Wednesday or Arsenal or whoever went and did many European tours. I mean, famously, some clubs did. I didn't ever do this book, but I was mentioning Keith Gregson earlier, the historian at Ashborough Cricket and Rugby Club. About 6 years ago, maybe roughly 6 years ago, Keith introduced me to a guy based in Argentina, an Argentinian football supporter who was dead keen to do a book about English teams like Tottenham Hotspur, for instance. I remember one who had gone on to it in South America, and he wanted me to help him do the book. And anyway, cut a long story short, I didn't do it. I had a look at what he was doing. It was going to need an awful lot of work. I didn't have the time to do. I was too committed to doing other things. But for a few weeks, he was sending me loads and loads of stuff about the English teams that had gone to play in South America in relatively early years, and so there were obviously examples that come to my mind of other club teams going abroad to play, whether they were playing South American club teams or international teams, I can't remember, but possibly. But I mean, it happens from time to time. I mean, you some of the people listening to this might have seen Sunderland play against club teams at Sunderland because, when Jimmy Shoulder was manager of Australia in '77, Jimmy Shoulder, the ex-Sunderland player, understudied Len Ashurst in the '60s, and a good friend of mine. I go out for coffee with Jimmy every now and then now. Jimmy and Colin Suggett and my friend Malcolm Bramley, who is the chairman of the Senior Supporters Association. And so Jimmy Shoulder was manager of Australia and brought Australia to play a game at Roker Park. More recently, of course, people might well have seen Sunderland play the Republic of Ireland at the Stadium of Light for Niall Quinn's benefit match. Mm-hmm. So it does happen.
Yeah,
and of course, in Sunderland's centenary year of 1979, Sunderland played England for the centenary match at the Roker Park.
Mm-hmm. What was the score?
We got beat 2-0. Bob Latchford scored both goals for England.
That's not too bad. It's not too bad. We still beat Spain. Around that time, then, Rob, like 1934, we also played some other friendlies, didn't we? Now we've played matches against a team called Ligue du Nord, and we've also played friendlies against Racing Club de Paris and Corinthians in the 1930s.
Yeah.
What was all that about?
Yeah, well, it was quite simple. Sunderland, I mean, like any club, Sunderland have always played a lot of friendly games. The difference now is, in this day and age, in 2025, when you talk about friendlies, people tend to think, friendlies, they're just pre-season games, or maybe an end-of-season testimonial, or maybe even occasionally a little bit of an end-of-season tour, particularly for Premier League teams who spend all summer, all season telling us how tired they are, and then the moment that the season's finished, they're off jetting around Asia or somewhere, or Australia or America, playing lucrative friendlies, and don't seem to be too tired to do that, do they? It always seems somewhat ironic to me. I mean, I understand why they do it. It's the pull of the money, but I don't think you can have it both ways. I don't think you can complain about being tired and then say, we can play all these extra games. But way back in the 1890s, I mean, this season is the 130th anniversary of when Sunderland became world champions. And I've been doing a series in the match programme every week talking about this. Now, in those days, the only clubs playing football to any the only countries playing football to any great standard was Scotland and England. And although the cup winners of Scotland and England had played before, for a match billed as the World Championship, in 1895, it was the first time the league champions of Scotland and England ever played each other. And the Scottish champions were Hearts. Sunderland, as the team of all the talents, had just won the league title for the third time in 4 years. It's the same year as the famous painting everybody knows in the Stadium of Light, the Thomas Hemme painting.
Yep. It's
from the 2nd of January 1895 in a game against Aston Villa. But in that season, at the end of the season, Sunderland went up to Tynecastle, which was still Hearts' ground as it is now, and Sunderland beat Hearts 5-3 to become proclaimed world champions. That was the billing for the game anyway. But even so, in the programme this season, I've been doing basically a match-by-match resume of that season, retelling the story of that season. And although a lot of those games were talking about key league games leading up to vital league games in the search for the league championship, still, throughout the season, Sunderland would be playing endless friendlies, not just pre-season friendlies. They'd play about almost as many friendlies during the season as they would play league games. And the reason was Sunderland was such a big draw, to other clubs. They had been league champions in 1892, league champions again in 1893, runners-up in 1894, were on course for the championship in 1895. Other clubs in both Scotland and England would invite Sunderland to come and play them. Mm-hmm. And so they would play them, and they'd play them, and Sunderland would pocket a lot of money for it. Never mind the league. I mean, Sunderland won the league really despite the directors rather than because of them, because the directors were just trying to coin in the money. So throughout history, right from that sort of era, friendlies have been, part and parcel of football. I mean, we're talking here about, international fans. You mentioned earlier a guy who lived near Stockholm. Well, one of my two sons works for a company who were based in Stockholm, and he has an apartment in Stockholm. Though I have to say he's hardly ever there because he's always touring the world. He's in North Macedonia today. He was in Bulgaria yesterday. He spends a lot of his time in China, which is where his girlfriend's from. He spends a lot of time in Gran Canaria, which is where his girlfriend lives. So he's always on the go. My other son is based in Vancouver and has a season, though both of them watch all Sunderland games, regardless of the silly kick-off times, because as North American fans will know, it's often early in the morning, and Vancouver 8 hours behind us. So a 3 o'clock in the afternoon kick-off is 7 o'clock in the morning. That's not too bad for him. He's up then anyway. He's got a 2-year-old. But obviously 12:30 kick-offs, well, that's 4:30 in the morning. But my son's also got a season ticket for Vancouver Whitecaps. And clearly there's some big names in that league, top of them being Lionel Messi, who, when Lionel Messi's team were due at Vancouver Whitecaps, I was there just a few weeks before that game was due to be played, and all the Sky trains going through Vancouver had pictures of Messi on the side, come and see Lionel Messi. And of course, guess what? He didn't play. No, it was a league game, not a friendly, But nonetheless, whoever Lionel Messi's playing for now or Ronaldo's playing for, those teams get hawked around, come and see such and such a player, whether it's a friendly or whether it's a league game. The draw is more the player. I mean, how long ago? 4 or 5 years ago, I was in Hong Kong, and I went to see a match in Hong Kong, a team called Kitchi, and they had just signed Diego Forlan. Remember him? Ex-Man United, Uruguayan striker. And the place was going, I mean, he was ancient by then. He was pushing 40, but he was still a huge name to be playing in Hong Kong football. And so the attraction for most people to go to the game was not to see the two teams involved. It was to go and see a star name. In the same way as people go to see a star name like Lionel Messi now. And back in the day, some of the top star names in the world were Sunderland players, and that's why Sunderland were in such high demand to go and play friendlies.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned there the Lionel Messi game when he didn't play. Is that the one where they offered a refund for the tickets?
No, that was another. Vancouver Whitecaps did offer, I think, free tickets to the next game or something to all those people who bought extra tickets for the game. But I think it's quite regular. He doesn't turn up at certain grounds, partly because of the distance in travel, which can be huge. Partly because of the playing surface of some of the home teams. But nonetheless, when every team have got Lionel Messi's side on their fixture list, clearly their commercial department go into overdrive, thinking, come and see Lionel Messi, and he may or may not play. It's a bit like, I remember in the 60s, I mean, I was going to watch every Sunderland game, regardless of who we were playing, but it seemed that just about every year, seemed to me as a kid, just about every year when we played Man United, Dennis Law was always injured. I saw Bestie play a lot of times, and Bobby Charlton play a lot of times, but it seemed that I know Dennis Law played against us in the 64 Cup ties, but later once we'd been promoted, Dennis seemed to often be injured in matches against Roker Park. It was just bad luck. There were several games when Man United played at Roker Park and Dennis was injured, and it was the same sort of feeling. You want your team to win, but you also want to see the top players from the opposition.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks for that, Rob. Well, moving on then. In the 1950s. If my information is correct, well, Mark's information from our branch, he's got a massive collection of memorabilia that's been passed down from generations, old Sunderland programmes. And his grandfather used to tell him about the floodlit games, the first floodlit games in the 50s. Is it true that we were the second team in England to install them?
No, not really. There was a lot of teams all bringing floodlights in around at the same time. Our first floodlit game was against Dundee. In 52, I think it was 52, 53. We played a lot of prestige games. I remember we played Juventus about 57. There was obviously games against Moscow Dynamo, Racing Club de Paris, First Vienna. etc., etc. There's a friend of mine who's I see from time to time who played 8 games for Sunderland in the 50s. He was very much on the fringes of the side, a regular reserve player in the days before substitutes. This guy's in his 80s now, and he's called Graham Reid. And again, Graham is, as I say, he had 8 first-team appearances. And again, Graham falls into that category of people who are my real expert go-to friends, because although he's in his 80s, Graham has a great memory and a great power of recall, and not least for reserve players. So if I need to know about reserve players from his era, I'll quite often ring Graham up and say, what can you tell me about so-and-so? He'll be very, very good. But one of the things Graham told me, and I subsequently went and found pictures and thought, yeah, you're absolutely bang on, is that when we were playing these friendlies, these first games under floodlights, the club produced some special fluorescent red shirts that they thought would reflect better in the lights of the day. So if you do see pictures from games in those days, often Sunderland, in floodlit games, often Sunderland, even though they're at home, are not necessarily wearing red and white stripes, but they're wearing like a red, like a sort of a glossy fluorescent kind of material. And of course, the floodlights then, while they were a big new invention for people going to football matches, they weren't the sort of high-powered floodlights we've got now. So these extra sort of reflective shirts would obviously help in terms of player recognition. And of course, just thinking about that as well, as many people will know, not least you guys in Spain, in the first few years of the European Cup starting in 55, Real Madrid won it the first 5 times, playing in all white. And that was one of the reasons why Don Revie changed Leeds' colours to all white, because he thought that white strip helped make you look bigger and more clearly identifiable on the pitch, not least when you're playing under lights.
Well, it might have helped, but I think Franco paying the referees also helped as well.
Yeah. Yeah. They did have some canny players, mind, for Real Madrid.
They did.
I have a friend of mine called Bill Mantle who used to cover Sunderland on the radio for Sun FM. I used to travel to a lot of away games with Bill. Great guy. He was a professional player himself as a young lad. But Bill was a Glaswegian, or actually he was from Perth in Scotland, but he lived in Glasgow. And Bill was at the famous game, the 1960 European Cup final, when Real Madrid beat Eintracht Frankfurt 7-3 in the final at Hampden. And what people often don't realise is that Eintracht Frankfurt had knocked Rangers out in the semi-final. And you could look this up to see if I'm right, but off the top of my head, I think the aggregate score in the semi-final had been something like 11-1 to Eintracht Frankfurt. And Rangers were Bill's big favourite team, really rated them. And then, of course, the team who absolutely hammered Rangers out of sight then get beat 7-3 by Real Madrid. So Franco or not, bent referees or not, in the likes of Puskis and Di Stefano, I think we had 2 of the all-time great players. And, of course, Marcos Alonso's granddad at left back.
Yep, indeed. And also on Rangers, they're going to be playing Athletic Club Bilbao tomorrow night at Ibrox, and I think it's the quarter-final of the Europa League, and that's going to be a tasty game. Right then, so we mentioned before, Rob, the 73 Cup final, and then the following season in Europe, we played 2 matches against Vasa Budapest. What's your memories of those 2 games?
Well, my main memory is how disappointed I was that I could not go to the away game in Budapest. But I was only 15. I didn't have any money. My mum and dad certainly didn't have the money to pack me off to Budapest. But I was going to every away game at that point, at least every domestic away game. But it was one thing getting to Portsmouth or Cardiff or Sheffield, bit of a different kettle of fish trying to get to Budapest. I remember watching the highlights on the telly. Billy Hughes scoring our first goal in Europe in the first leg of the away game at Vasas. And then Dennis Stewart with one of my favourite Sunderland goals for the second goal in the 2-0 win. When he sort of slaloms his way through the Vasas defence, running from the halfway line, slotting it past the goalkeeper. And then the home game at Sunderland, people might look up in the record books and think the crowds weren't very big. The crowds were a lot lower than average for that. What people might not realise is the reason the crowds were lower was that the directors had doubled the admission prices. And the reason they doubled the admission prices was because for televised European football, comes back to what you were asking about earlier with floodlights, we needed higher grade floodlights than we had. So the reasons given for the directors for the doubling of the money was to help the televising of these games. Not that they were broadcast live. It wasn't like these days where there's a live match on every night, but the highlights. And I always thought that was the peak of the irony of how the television fan is put above the real fan.
Yeah.
When the real fans, thank you, when the real fans are being inconvenienced with kick-off times that suit the telly, like 12:30s and 8 o'clocks and 8 o'clock games on a night away when you could have played on the Saturday, all of that. The actual paying fan often seems to me to be the poor relation. I do understand the role of television in the modern game. I do understand how important the money from television is in the modern game. But nonetheless, one of the reasons television likes football is because of the atmosphere of football grounds. And that atmosphere will drop away if people stop going because of the inconvenience of how difficult they make it to get to games at certain times. But the fact that fans had to pay double, fans that were actually going had to pay double so that people on the telly could see it a bit better, always seemed to me to be a bit harsh.
Yeah.
In the second leg, Dennis Stewart scored a penalty, 1-1-0, 3-0 aggregate. And then we drew Sporting Lisbon. Sporting Lisbon, if I remember rightly, had knocked out Cardiff City in the previous round. Cardiff in, obviously, is the Welsh Cup winners. And, excuse me, in the home leg, we won 2-1. Mickey Horswell scored and Bobby Kerr scored. As I remember it, Bobby Kerr's goal at the Roker end was a cross that the keeper sort of carried over his line, if my memory is correct. And then a couple of minutes to go, Sporting got their all-important away goal. It was scored by Hector Yazaldi, who was the top scorer in Europe that year with 46 goals. So they've got an away goal. Away goals count a double if it came into play. So it was an important goal for them. We went to Lisbon for the second leg. Sporting did not live up to the name. They were not Sporting at all. Sunderland were inexperienced, totally inexperienced in European football, did not know how to cope with the darker arts of European football, which were there even then in 1973. The moment Sporting got ahead, they won 2-0 to win 3-2 on aggregate. The moment they got ahead, all the ball boys in the big stadium just disappeared. There was a lot of time wasting and stuff, yeah. A couple of the Sunderland directors managed to have their pockets picked while they were in Lisbon. I remember them telling me from that particular game. Anyway, we went out and we're still waiting for another game in major European competition. Although let's not forget the good old Anglo-Italian Cup.
Yep.
We had played in a couple of years before then. Obviously not a major European competition, but still for me, in 1970 when I was 12, it was a great novelty to go along and see teams like Lazio and Fiorentina at Roker Park.
Yep, absolutely. And on that topic then, Rob, I mean, we haven't played in European competition since then, but are you hopeful that in the next 10 years we can get some kind of European football at the Stadium of Light? We've had international football. I mean, you look at teams in the Premier League, you look at Brighton, Aston Villa doing well.
Earlier on, you asked me about predictions or thoughts. Yeah. I'm not looking 10 games ahead, let alone 10 years. I'm very much the old football cliche person of one game at a time. At the moment, I'm just looking towards Swansea this Saturday. Obviously, I would love to think I was going to see Sunderland play some European football. You know, I'm 67 now, so I'd like to see some European football before I'm too old to stop to be able to keep going. You know, I'm in good health at the moment, but you never know. So clearly, I would love Sunderland to be successful. I would love Sunderland, first of all, to get into the Premier League and then be able to survive in the Premier League. And then in terms of qualifying for Europe at some point, well, why not? You know, yes, there are teams that are, or clubs, should I say, who are nowhere near as historically significant as Sunderland, have nowhere near the fan base as Sunderland, but have been in Europe a lot or are going to be in Europe shortly. I mean, let's take a club like Bournemouth, for instance, who may well qualify for Europe this season. Bournemouth have played some of the best football I've seen this season. and you look at the fact their ground holds about 11,000, and often to me when I see the attendance isn't even full, I don't know whether that's because of segregation between the home fans and the away fans, but you think, how on earth can they do it? Well, the reason they do it is obviously over the years, recently, it's not that many years. I used to go and watch Hartlepool play. Hartlepool were playing in Sunderland, weren't you? It's over the last 50 years, I've seen a lot of games at Hartlepool, midweek games, if they're playing and we are not. It's not that many years since I went to see Bournemouth playing in Hartlepool. And here they are now, one of the best teams in the Premier League. The Bournemouth supporters who've been supporters for years probably can't believe it. They probably still think they're dreaming. Well, if they can dream, why can't we?
Exactly.
And at some point it might be our turn.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. We never know. Man City might get docked that League Cup title from 2013.
Well, they won't, because if their 115 charges are held up against them, they are FA charges. And the League Cup was not an FA competition. It was a Football League competition. So, although I was speaking to Danny Collins recently, who was an unused sub in the FA Cup final against Man City in that era for Stoke, and Danny's thinking, if all of those charges get proven and they hand over the winners to other people, he says, well, I might end up with my FA Cup winners medal after all. But sadly, Lee Catamol and Fabio Barini and company are not going to get a League Cup winners medal over that, because it was a Football League competition, even if Man City were to be severely punished.
Well, we'll just stick with the memories of Covent Garden and Trafalgar, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was spectacular. Right, Rob, we'll move on then. Just a couple of questions that we've had in. If you could choose a foreign team to have a friendly against, who would it be? Vancouver
Whitecaps away. I'll go and see my son.
Right, that one's quite clear. And a question here is...
Of course, Lee, let's just mention there, in case we don't mention it in this course, because my interest in Vancouver is because my son and my grandson and my daughter-in-law live there. But of course, in 1967, Sunderland Football Club, as a football club, went and represented Vancouver. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will know that. Certainly the NASA members will know this.
Yep.
So in 67, when they were trying to get a North American Soccer League off the ground, they had a summer where they invited teams from England, Scotland, Ireland, Holland, Dick Advocaat's team, ADR Den Haag, who he was a young player with at the time, Brazil, Uruguay, Italy, all went and played in America, by which I mean North America, not necessarily the USA, USA and Canada, representing different cities, and played can you imagine it? Sunderland had just finished, the season in the first division, and then the entire team, lock, stock and barrel, go over and play about 12 games, I think it was, during the summer, and then come in a competitive setting, and then come back and start the following season. And Sunderland were sent over and represented Vancouver. They were called the Royal Vancouver Canadians. And I look after the display cabinets at the Stadium of Light. And in there, I've got a number of gifts that we've been given from foreign clubs over the years when we have played them in friendlies. And one of the things I've got on display there is a little totem pole. And the totem pole, and if you've never been to Vancouver, you might or might not know, but there are some really big and very impressive totem poles in Vancouver in a place, I think it's called Stanley Park, from the indigenous people in Canada. And so this totem pole with a plaque on thanking Sunderland for representing Royal Vancouver Canadians is on display in the foyer of the Stadium of Light. Wow. Yeah. There would be a good, and of course also in later years, several Sunderland players like Stan Cummins, I think Barry Siddle, Sean Elliott went and played for Vancouver Whitecaps on loan during the summer season, which was a way of them, enhancing their money. It was a way of Sunderland helping to keep some of their top stars that might want to be away by allowing them to go and play in North America through the summer. So yes, easy choice for me, yeah. Vancouver Whitecaps. And if it was a European team, I'd like to go and play in the San Siro so that a team from up the road can stop saying, have you ever seen a Macam in Milan? And if any of them are listening, can I just say, I have been to Milan several times. I've seen AC Milan play, and I've seen Inter Milan play on numerous occasions because I'm a big fan of Italian football.
Period.
Yeah, I love Italian football.
That's brilliant.
The old editor of the old Football Italia magazine, people might remember, and the wonderful, what in my opinion is the best television football program ever, which was Gazzetta. It
Yep.
used to be on with James Richardson on a Saturday morning, and the Italian football, around about that sort of that's time when Italian football was very popular. Well, the top guy in that was a good friend of mine called John D. Taylor, who is now, I think, in his 80s, John. He's very involved with Wycombe Wanderers because that's where he lives. Um, he runs their former players association and so on. But John is a big Sunderland supporter. So in the days when I used to edit the old Legion of Light magazine, whenever I put one out, if there was an interview in with an old player from the 50s, which was his era, or early 60s, you could bet your life within 3 or 4 days of the magazine coming out and have John on the phone talking about whichever player it was we'd been featuring. So yeah, big fan of Italian football when we're talking about football from around the world.
No, I agree with that. I used to watch that as a kid on a Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, great
Um,
program.
but you mentioned there, Rob, that comes up my next point, Canada and that Vancouver connection.
Mhm.
Johnny from our branch asked, like, when did our fan base start to expand into around the world? Because was it because the what we call the £10 poms, no, in the 1940s after the World War that we started to get people go to
Yeah,
Australia, New Zealand,
yeah.
and then obviously the assisted passage in Canada in the 1960s.
Mhm.
Was that kind of connected to that, do you think?
I think anything on that is just guesswork.
Yeah.
In terms of £10 poms, my brother-in-law was a £10 pom. So my wife's always very interested in the whole story of the £10 poms. Though I have to say, when she watched that TV series called £10 poms, she gave up about 10 minutes thinking it was utter rubbish. Um, but I think really the answer to your question is there's never, as far as I'm aware, and I'm pretty sure about this, there's never been any sort of organised wave that support development around the world. Just as there's always people gone from Sunderland and other places to live around the world. All of you people, or I imagine all of you people listening to this who are international fans, fall into that either yourselves or your dads or mums or granddads or grandmothers or whatever made that move, and you still support Sunderland because that's where your family are from.
Yep.
And I'm I was about to say I'm not a sociologist. I do have a degree in sociology from about 18 million years ago, amongst others. But I think you'd need to talk to a modern day sociologist to look at the demographic movements of people to see to what extent the increase in the diaspora of northeastern people has moved abroad. But my hunch is that in the last 40 or 50 years, more and more people have gone abroad, partly because it's easier,
Hmm.
partly because it's very attractive in often to go and live in different countries. I mean, my own two sons have done it, um, and also because the transport's easier, and not least, communication is easier. So if you're a Sunderland supporter now and you live in any part of the world, you can watch the games on the telly. You know, you can go on the internet every day, and you can know just as much about what's going on with the team as somebody who, like me, lives 10 minutes drive away from the Stadium of Light.
Yep.
You can do that now.
Yep.
Whereas when my brother-in-law went out to Western Australia as a £10 pom in the 1960s, his way of keeping up with the team was that the football echo would be posted out and would get to him some weeks later. Yes, he'd hear the scores on the radio, the World Service, but other than the score, he'd know next to nothing about the match until the football echo arrived weeks after the game.
Hmm.
Um, so it's a lot easier now if you're a overseas based fan to keep in touch with what's going on, and I think that's helped the fact that we've got, like, this weekend International Fans Day and people coming from all around the world, um, and getting together and sharing their experiences, and it's wonderful that people who follow the team so closely and so passionately from afar once in a while get to actually see a game for real, and be there and be amongst their fellow supporters. That's absolutely great. But I think it's just grown naturally over the years because of all of those things I've just mentioned, not least the easier communications these days.
Yeah. No, and like some of our fans there, some of the stories that they've told me about how they became fans. one example is Dan from the Bulgarian branch. He's a heavy metal guy, long
Yeah.
hair, and he loves rock music. And he heard the name Roker Park, and he reminded him of rock music. And
Yeah, well,
uh,
there you go. That's a great one. That's a great one. And as you will know, some people from abroad just like the name Sunderland. They seem to think it's a sunny place.
yep,
There's a friend of my son's in Stockholm. His father, who I've met a couple of times, and I've met him a couple of times when he's brought people over to the Stadium of Light, is a well-known Swedish TV personality. And he supported Sunderland since the 50s. And he simply supported Sunderland because he liked the name Sunderland. And then he saw the strip and he liked the red and white stripes.
yep.
And this guy's, well, goodness knows, in his 80s, maybe he's even late 80s now,
Hmm.
but has followed Sunderland for years, really seriously. But as with, I'm sure it'll be the case with a lot of your members, over the years, most of the times he's seen Sunderland play has actually been in London because it was easier for people to get a flight to London and get back home, without breaking the bank too much. So I know a lot of international fans whose main experience of seeing Sunderland's away games, and particularly in London.
Yeah. Well, I am going to mention one thing, Rob, because I do the podcast in Spanish as well for our Spanish speakers.
Wow, didn't know you did
Um,
that. Yeah.
oh yeah, that's a challenge.
If you were going to interview me and want me to speak in Spanish, I'll be
Anyway, so I do want to mention one of the lads from our branch, Julian, he became a fan because his favorite player at the time was Asamoah Gyan.
Yeah,
And although Asamoah didn't stay with us for very long, he got the bug, and he's been a fan. He went to the Wickham final a few years ago. He couldn't get tickets in the Sunderland, so he was in the Wickham end with his Sunderland shirt and with three mates.
yeah.
So that was brilliant. And
Can I just say, Asamoah Gyan would have loved the fact he had three mates. Because you remember Asamoah Gyan loved the number three. He even
yeah,
had it sometimes at some point shaved into his head.
yeah,
I said earlier I didn't know the numbers, but did he wear number three or did he want number three? I can't remember.
I think yeah,
Did you have a number? I mean, I never know who's got what number.
yeah. No, and there was also a girl we've got called Millie, and she's in Cordoba in Argentina,
Yeah,
and one of her favorite players was Ignacio Scocco.
yeah,
And although he didn't stay very long, she got the bug, and she's a
yeah,
massive Sunderland fan. Got the
yeah,
shirt, got 09 on the back.
yeah.
So I don't know, what is it about Sunderland that these fans just stay connected with the club,
Well,
even though.
I think one of the things now, and I'm sure you must have picked this up, is that it's not rare now for people who've got no family connections with Sunderland to now have a real serious interest in Sunderland, sometimes serious enough for them to travel to come to the Stadium of Light to see a game because of the Netflix series.
Mhm.
Captured the imagination of a lot of people around the world, did an awful lot for the profile of the football club. And it's not at all rare for me. I'm not saying I do this every week, but it's not at all rare for me to bump into supporters at the Stadium of Light who are there for their first and possibly last visit, but they've come from. I remember a couple of months ago, outside the ground, there's a couple of young lads. I say young lads, young to me, they were in their 20s, who were taking photographs by the Stobo statue. And I got talking to them, and they'd come from Norway. And when I was saying, why are you here? What's the big draw? Oh, we saw the Netflix series. We're so interested. We loved the crowd that much. We had to come and experience it for ourselves. And that's not a rare conversation I would have with people at the match.
Mhm.
I'm sure, obviously, I can only ever meet the tip of the iceberg of the people who do that. They're all just chance encounters usually, unless as occasionally happens, Chris Waters says to me, Rob, I've got such and such a person coming. Will you come and say hello? And I'm always more than happy to do so if I can,
Yep, no, brilliant. Right, we'll move on then swiftly, Rob. Favorite? No, sorry. Who was our first foreign player, non-Irish and non-British? Any ideas?
Okay, yeah. Our first foreign player. Well, the first one to make his debut was a fella called Jock Gibson.
Hmm.
Jock Gibson was born in Philadelphia in 1898. He debuted for Sunderland in 1920 against Everton, but he'd left America when he was 2. He had Scottish parents, but he was born in America.
Hmm.
So he was the first to debut. Somebody who was born before him, but debuted after, if you're talking about how you depends on how you define your first foreign player, would be Tom Wagstaff. He was born in 1896 in India. His father was in the army, which is how come he was born in India. So Tom Wagstaff, born 1896 in India, or Jock Gibson, born 1898 in Philadelphia. So obviously Gibson was born a couple of years after Wagstaff, but Gibson did debut earlier. So they're the first players that we had that were born outside of England, Scotland, Wales or Ireland. And by Ireland, for these purposes, I'm talking about both sides of the border.
Yep. All right. Brilliant. And right, next question is from Robin from the Czech Republic branch. He's asking, who has been your favourite foreign manager for Sunderland, and how do they compare to the British and Irish managers that we've had?
My favourite foreign manager, well, there's two. One is, I've got to say, Regis Lebris, because here we are now. We're recording this, between the Norwich and Swansea games. So here we are. There's 5 games left of the season, and we have already qualified for the playoffs. Now, you tell me any Sunderland supporter who thought that would happen at the beginning of the season, and I will be astonished, because a lot of people at the beginning of the season were talking about, will we have a relegation battle given the way the second half of last season was? Will we maybe at best push to try and qualify for the playoffs? We've qualified for the playoffs. There's still 5 games to go. Now, I sense around Sunderland a little bit of disappointment in the air, a little bit of doom and gloom even, because people think, well, we've chucked away a lot of points, we've conceded a lot of last-minute goals. We could have so easily, if we just got 2 or 3 of those games right, where we hadn't turned 3 points into 1 in the last minute by giving a daft goal away, we could have been right in the thick for the automatics. Of course, you always want a bit more. But let's just take a step back and think. We bring in a manager or a head coach, to be more accurate, in Regis Lebris at the beginning of the season, who I doubt if very many people had ever heard of. I'd never heard of him. I had to find out about him. So a completely unknown quantity, a guy who's got no experience whatsoever of English football, and he turns a team that were going the wrong way last season into a team that qualified for the playoffs with 5 games to go. Now, whether we can finish the job and get promoted, who knows? Yeah, anybody's guess, But we've got as good a chance as anybody. So you have to say, so far, a very big well done to Regis Lebris, and also, to be fair, a very well done to the people who recruited Regis Lebris, because they'd heard of him, though we hadn't. In terms of a personal favourite, it's an easy question for me, and the answer is Dick Advocat. I love Dick Advocat. As you may well know, I wrote the manager's notes in the match programme for many years with many, many, many managers. And Dick Advocat was one of those managers I got on with particularly well. He was an excellent guy. I really liked him. I thought he did a fabulous job for Sunderland. He really built people up, got them to believe in themselves, got them to believe in him. And I'll not forget that night at Arsenal when we needed a point to stay up. And we still had another game to go, Chelsea, if I remember rightly, but we wanted to get that point at Arsenal. So we're away to Arsenal. Arsenal are flying, great side. And we absolutely busted. I remember Jermaine Defoe spent most of the game covering his left back.
Yep.
Because Dick had everybody working their absolute socks off for the team. We got that 0-0. Dick was very emotional after the game.
Yep.
And he's very experienced. One of his assistants, a very, very experienced guy, maybe even more experienced than Dick, or certainly a bit older than him, a guy called Bert van Lingen. The pair of them were in tears afterwards, and in the tunnel afterwards, and then up in the press afterwards. It really meant something to them. And for a player, well, he was a player and then a manager who'd managed so many teams, both countries and clubs around the world, and had so many experiences. You talk about Sunderland getting under Niall Quinn's skin. It's certainly got under Dick Advocat's. He was a great guy to work with, very, very good guy. One of those managers from a personal point of view, not all of them do this, but one of those managers who trusted me with a lot of off-the-record information. So I always was well in the know when Dick Advocat was there. And obviously, whatever information I was trusted with, you don't keep that trust if you don't keep information to yourself, which I did. But it was always very useful for me to know what was going on and why. and I had a particularly good relationship with Dick Advocat. So yeah, Dick Advocat, but also a big shout out to Regis Libris.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and being a language teacher, Robin, in Bilbao, I'm impressed with Regis's English skills because
Yeah,
he has
yeah,
come on a hell of a lot.
absolutely. Yeah, very, very good. Well, as people will know, he's a very educated man, a very deep thinking man. Um, he's my nickname for him is the Professor. You know, he is very, very studious. He's very calm. After games in press conferences, while I'm trying to be professional and objective and not let my emotions get the better of me, I'm sometimes still seething with the referee, or I'm seething with the tactics of the opposition. If they've been involved in the dark arts, and we've seen a bit of that recently. And Regis comes in, and he's really, regardless of whether the game's gone well or not, he seems to be very able to quickly take a step back and look at the big picture and be calm and collected, and that's very impressive.
Absolutely. That's one of the things I like about him. He's very calm, isn't he?
Yeah.
Right then, brilliant. So we've got that sorted. Question from Paul, my mate Paul, who works at the British Consulate in Barcelona. He's actually going to be at the match this weekend, so you might bump into him.
Right.
He asks us, did we almost sign Maradona?
Well, it depends on how you want to define almost. Now, I said I wasn't going to do any advertising earlier because I talked to you about that fact that Absolute Record book, The Players, is up for £10. And the only you're going to see this, Lee, because you told me at the beginning that these things work, it's just audio, but I'm holding up a book now that I brought out a couple of years ago called What If? Turning Points in the History of Sunderland AFC. And there are 4 people on the cover, and one of them is Diego Maradona. Because in this particular book, I tell the story of how Diego Maradona, as a teenager, threatened to retire, right, as a teenager, if he was not allowed to sign for Sunderland, because he was desperately keen to sign for Sunderland. It was his big moment to move to a European club. It was his big moment to get an opportunity to play European football and, of course, to get a walloping increase in his salary. But at the time, the Argentinian military junta would not allow their star players to leave the country. And so he didn't end up coming to Sunderland. So yeah, Sunderland had a serious interest in Diego Maradona. Obviously, if he'd come, we wouldn't have had him for very long, but it would have been some great days to have him. And I'm sure when it was time for him to move on in his career, we'd have got a nice big fat transfer fee that hopefully we wouldn't have wasted, and it would have gone on to help strengthen the team. So yeah, there is some truth in that, and I'm sure you can probably find the story somewhere on the internet. But also in that book, What If? The turning points in the history of Sunderland Football Club. I've told that story in there, together with lots of stories of other. I mean, he's obviously Maradona's the top of the tree, but I've told also the stories of lots of other very, very famous players who Sunderland were at some point really serious about trying to bring into the club, and for one reason or another they didn't come in. So I won't go into them now. Some people know some of those stories well. Some might be a surprise to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you want to hear the rest of that story, What If? Is the book, and I'll be getting that next time I'm over, Rob.
Yeah.
Right, we're going to finish up with one more thing, Rob. Your all-time SAFC starting 11 from goalkeeper to forward, if you can, non-British, non-Irish. I've got mine, so I'll tell you mine first. I'm going to go with Thomas Sorensen in goal.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, go slowly and I'll tell you which ones I agree with.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sorensen in goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Thomas Sorensen, clearly our best overseas goalkeeper. And when you say non-Irish, does this mean anybody from Ireland, or can we include the Republic of Ireland because that's a different country?
Well, I mean, I've gone for like the non-British and Ireland, the non-UK and Republic of Ireland.
Right, okay, so I can't have Charlie Hurley then?
No.
He's Republic of Ireland. I can't have Niall Quinn.
No.
Because I'd have Quinn and Hurley if I could have Republic of Ireland players. So go on then. Go on.
Me too. Right back, I've got Darius Kubicki.
Yes, me too.
Left back, I mean, I've got Van Aanholt or Julio, but Julio didn't really play for us as a left back. He plays a left midfielder.
Yeah, I mean, he was a left back. Julio liked playing left back. I thought you would have gone for Marcos Alonso because of the Spanish connection.
Yeah.
But for me, although he didn't play an awful lot of games for us at left back, I would go for Anthony Rivalier. I'm never
Yeah.
sure how to pronounce his second name. This is the French guy that we had. He'd won 5 successive league titles with Lyon. He was an absolutely class act when he played for us.
Right, my 2 centre backs are Emerson Tom and John Mensah.
Okay, I can see why. I would go for 2 different players. I would go for Yunus Kabul and Lamine Kone, partly because they were so good as a combination. I certainly wouldn't have Lamine Kone in the version we got after Yunus left.
Yeah.
But as a partnership, they were excellent. I did like Emerson Tom a lot. John Mensah, who was crackers to talk to, but an absolutely lovely lad. Top class player, but obviously very, very injury prone. But Kone, at the time before we gave him his big fat contract to stop him going to Everton, after which he wasn't so good, Kone was a colossus at centre half. Yep. And Kabul was a brilliant partner for him. I'm not saying they were as good as Sean Elliott and Jeff Clark in the 1980 promotion side, but when people talk to me about the best ever centre halves, I'm always going to say Charlie Hurley and Dave Watson. But if I'm talking about partnerships, people who work together and play together, I'd always go at Clark and Elliott as a best partnership. And Kone and Kabul were not as good as them, but they were very close.
All right. Right, then on to midfield. Right wing or right midfield, Steve Malbranque.
I like Steed. I like Steed a lot. But he's not in. He wouldn't be in my team. He might be on the bench. Well, he would be on the bench. He's a great player. Really like Steve Malbranque. Excellent player. Love watching him play. But I've got other choices.
Who have you got?
Well, in my midfield, I'd have Claudio Reyna.
Yep.
Who was in the FIFA team of the tournament, the 2002 World Cup, while he was a Southern player. Stefan Schwartz, who I always used to call the hovercraft because he just used to glide across the pitch. I know he never managed to glide into space. Everybody knows he wanted to be a spaceman and Sunderland wouldn't let him go into space because of his contract. But he was good at finding space. Bum, bum. Sorry about that. That's why my kids live abroad, because of my dad jokes. And in a 3-man midfield, my other one would be Julio.
Julio. Okay, so you're going for 4-3-3.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, forwards in.
Yeah. Well, my other midfield, I did have Stefan Schwartz, and I was torn between Seb Larsson and Claudio Reyna. That was a hard choice.
I have to say, I wouldn't argue with Seb. I really loved Seb, one of my favourite players. Really one of my favourite players. And I had a lot of arguments about people with Seb Larsson when he was playing, because a lot of people got on his back. But firstly, he's Sunderland's most capped international in terms of caps won while with the club. Secondly, and also I mentioned my son, was based in Stockholm, and although he's not there much now, he was for many years. So I went to see Sweden with him a few times and saw Seb. In fact, on some occasions I was relying on Seb for tickets, which is another thing. He used to get me some good tickets right next to the dugouts. But I really liked Seb, but he wasn't as good in my opinion as Claudio Reyna or Stefan Schwartz or Julio. But I wouldn't argue with him ever being in the team. And one of the reasons I liked Seb the most is when things were going badly, Seb, or even if it was going badly for him and he wasn't having a good game, Seb never hid. He always wanted the ball. That to me is the mark of a really good team player. He always wanted the ball. You'd never find Seb Larsson hiding.
Yeah, well, there's a reason why he played over 100 games for Sweden, isn't there? So
quality player and a quality lad as well. In fact, just one last thing on Seb. A couple of years ago, my son was out jogging in Stockholm in his Sunderland shirt, and somebody went whizzing past on a cycle and shouted, "Away the lads!" at him. And my son looked round and it was Seb on the bike.
Brilliant. Right, well, my left winger, because I'm going to go for Julio left back, right? But left winger, I've gone for Stefan Sessegnon. I've gone for Stefan Sessegnon left wing, Rob.
Right, Stefan Sessegnon for me would not even be on my bench. I personally rate him as one of the most overrated players I've ever seen. The Sunderland shirt, most people listening to that will say, "God, Rob's crackers." They'll not be the first or last. Everything is a matter of opinion. The reason I say that is maybe a personal one, because he was never the most helpful of players off the pitch. But also, we had a spell where we built the team around Stefan Sessegnon. Everything in the team was channeled to go through Stefan Sessegnon, and I don't think we got enough end product. out of him to warrant the way the team was structured around him. I know people tell me what was the chant? God took Messi and Pele and came up with Stefan Session. Nice chant. I know why he was an eye-catching player. I know why people liked him, but not for me.
Not for you.
I've told you I've got Claudio Reyna, Stefan Schwartz, and Julio Arca.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
No question in my mind. I'd rather have them three, or Seb Larsson, or Steve Malbranck. And if I put my mind to it, no doubt. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I don't think Stefan Sessignon wasn't a good player. He was a good player, undoubtedly a good player, a talented, skillful player. Obviously, low centre of gravity. I just don't think we got the best out of him, and I don't think he got the best out of himself.
That's fair enough. That's a fair comment. Right, we'll go with your front three then, Rob. Who have you got?
Well, I can't have Quinny then because we're not having Republic of Ireland players. So, okay, I'm going to drop Quinny. I'm going to have on my right-hand side, I'm going to have Ahmad, who I loved, absolutely loved. Great player, great lad. Looked like a puff of wind would blow him over, but did not stop him trying to get stuck in. On the left, and you're talking about a three-man midfield where this guy can drop back into midfield, but in his prime, maybe he's more than when he was at Sunderland, he certainly would have the pace to be a really effective forward. And a brilliant lad and a highly, highly skilled footballer. I'd have Bolo Zenden. Yep. And for me, centre forward, seeing as Quinny's been sent back to Dublin and not allowed to play, I'd have Djibril Cissé.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one. I didn't think about Djibril.
Well, Djibril Cissé, let me... Djibril Cissé gave me the finest compliment I've ever had, right? Because when I interview people, I interview them, and I'm not one of these technical people that can do everything on the phone. My phone is for phone calls. That's it, basically. So I've got a little tiny digital recorder, and I was interviewing Djibril Cissé at the academy one day, and in the middle of my interview, I dropped by accident my digital recorder, and as it dropped, I caught it on my foot. And, the man who played in the Champions League final for Liverpool just turned around to me and drawled in his French accent. He just said, "Nice control." Nobody's ever said that to me before or since. Nice control. Normally my second touch is a tackle. I still play football now on a Tuesday morning. Old blokes walking football, and trust me, I can't play back and stop other people playing. But have Djibril Cissé say "nice control" was the highlight of my life.
Yeah, trapping a digital record with your right foot, right. I've gone. I mean, you wouldn't be disappointed with mine. I mean, I've gone for Ahmad, like behind the forward, and I was torn between. I didn't think of Cisse, but I was torn between Fabio Barini and Kenwyne Jones. Now, Fabio simply because he scored that corker at the Stadium Light against the Mags, and that goal was it's very special for me. Because I just moved to Bilbao in 2013. I used to live in Vitoria-Gasteiz down the road, famous for Deportivo Alavés. And I started working in a new English academy, and I met my co-founder of the branch, the Bilbao Black Cats, Johnny. And I remember meeting Johnny for the first time in the boss's office, and the boss said, "Hey, Johnny, this lad's from your way." And he said, the first thing he said was, "You're not a mag, are you?" And there we were, about a couple of months later, we were walking around the old town of Bilbao looking for a place to put the match on. They just looked at us like it was confused as hell. Yeah. We kind of given up, and we were walking around Bilbao. We saw this game salon with betting machines and fruit machines. So we're going here for a drink. And by chance, they give us a remote control, and we're just flicking through channels. And what do you know? It's the second half, Sunderland Newcastle. Yeah. So we were going absolutely wild while the woman was on the fruit machine, and we were just going wild when the Barini goal went in. It was just unbelievable. So that's one of my favorite memories.
Great goal, good lad. He's still, as you know, he's injured at the moment, I think, but he's still, as you know, playing for Sampdoria. I saw him about a year ago. He was at the match at the Stadium Light.
Yep.
Saw Fabio, and subsequently gave him a ring and interviewed him for the programme, because I did it on the weekend of the 10th anniversary of him scoring at Wembley. Really good lad. Kenwyne at his best, absolutely unplayable.
Yeah,
absolutely unplayable at his best. At his worst, might as well have not been on the pitch. With Kenwyne, you never knew what you were going to get. Whereas with the players I've generally picked on that team, I've chosen. Big thing for me is always consistency. And I think looking at the players there that I've picked, I think with an arguable exception of Cisse, I think they've all got a high level of consistency.
Yeah.
Kenwyn on his day was magnificent.
Yep, no, absolutely.
With the lad they've signed now, Abdullahi.
Yep.
Saw him score a hat-trick for the under-21s a few weeks ago. Obviously, he's been struggling with injury both before and since then. And he was a dead ringer for Kenwyn. He was big, strong, fast, had the ponytail, good leap on him. The only thing he didn't have is the day I saw him, he scored a hat-trick. And the only thing he didn't have that was Kenwyn's, he didn't do a somersault after he scored. Everything else, you could have thought this is Kenwyn at his best. So if that lad can get fit, I'm looking forward to Sunderland having a player who looks to me like he's got a real chance of being a really good player for us if he can get fit and if we can keep him fit.
Hopefully. Well, listen, I hope he doesn't do any backflips because if not, our injury table is terrible at the minute, isn't it? So hopefully he doesn't do anything on the training ground. Listen, Rob, we're going to wrap it up there, but listen, many thanks for coming on tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure. And before we finish, me and our branch, we just want to say thank you to you for putting us in touch with people like you mentioned before, Andrew Smithson, Mike Gibson, Keith Gregson, because you have helped us with our research and the Bilbao links. And no, it's always a pleasure to listen to you on the radio, listen to you on SAFC Live. I think Sunderland University will be giving you an honorary degree in digital media soon.
Don't bank on it.
But no, listen, Rob, enjoy the weekend. This weekend with the international fans. I think you'll be around meeting and greeting some of them, or
I'm sure over the course of the weekend I will be seeing quite a lot of the international fans. I certainly hope so. I have done on, I think it was last year and the year before. In some years, it's not been so easy because of me living up in Scotland and not necessarily being around except on a match day, but I'm around all the time now. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of them over the weekend.
Brilliant. Well, Rob, we'll leave it there then. So thanks for coming on, and how are the lads?
Cheers.